The Equal Rights Amendment, or ERA, is a proposed amendment to the United States Constitution. It aims to guarantee equal legal rights for all citizens, regardless of sex. The ERA was first introduced in Congress in 1923. It was a time of great social change, as women had recently gained the right to vote. The ERA was a response to the widespread discrimination faced by women in many areas of life. This included employment, education, and property rights. The amendment sought to enshrine gender equality into the very fabric of the nation's legal framework. Its proponents envisioned a future where women would no longer be relegated to second-class citizenship. However, the path to equality proved to be long and arduous. The ERA languished in Congress for decades, facing stiff opposition from conservative groups. They argued that it would undermine traditional family values and lead to unintended consequences for women. Despite these challenges, the ERA gained momentum in the 1970s amidst the growing women's rights movement. Finally, in 1972, Congress passed the ERA and sent it to the states for ratification. This victory was met with both celebration and a sobering realization. The ERA still needed to be ratified by 3/4 of the states to become part of the Constitution. The ratification process for the ERA was initially met with enthusiasm. Within a year, 30 states had voted in favor of the amendment, raising hopes for its swift adoption. However, the momentum soon slowed as opposition to the ERA intensified. Conservative groups led by figures like Phyllis Schlafly mounted a well-organized campaign against the amendment. They argued that the ERA would lead to the erosion of traditional gender roles, same-sex marriage, and women being drafted into the military. These arguments resonated with many Americans, and the ERA's progress stalled. Despite the setbacks, the fight for the ERA continued. Proponents of the amendment organized rallies, lobbied state legislatures, and challenged the opposition's claims. The debate over the ERA became increasingly polarized, reflecting the deep divisions within American society over gender roles and equality. In recent years, the ERA has experienced a resurgence of support. The #MeToo movement and the growing awareness of gender inequality have brought renewed attention to the need for equal rights for all genders. This renewed energy culminated in Virginia becoming the 38th state to ratify the ERA in 2020. On January 17, 2025, President Joe Biden made a historic announcement. He declared the Equal Rights Amendment ratified and part of the United States Constitution. This declaration came after decades of struggle and uncertainty surrounding the ERA's status. Biden's decision was based on the fact that 38 states have now voted to ratify the amendment, meeting the constitutional requirement of 3/4 of the states. In his statement, Biden emphasized that the ERA reflects the will of the American people and is long overdue. He argued that equality under the law, regardless of sex, is a fundamental right that should be enshrined in the Constitution. The president acknowledged that his declaration would likely face legal challenges. However, he expressed confidence that the ERA would ultimately be upheld by the courts. Biden's decision was hailed as a victory by women's rights advocates, who have long fought for the amendment's ratification. They saw it as a significant step towards achieving full gender equality in the United States. However, the declaration also sparked controversy and ignited a legal battle that could determine the fate of the ERA. President Biden's declaration of the ERA's ratification was not the final word on the matter. The responsibility for certifying amendments to the Constitution lies with the Archivist of the United States. This individual plays a crucial role in the amendment process. The archivist, however, declined to certify the ERA. She cited legal obstacles that complicated the amendment's adoption. These obstacles include the original ratification deadline set by Congress, which expired in 1982, and the subsequent actions of 5 states that rescinded their ratification votes. The archivist's stance created a legal quagmire. The Biden administration argued that the archivist's role is purely ministerial. They believed she was obligated to certify the ERA based on the 38 states that have ratified it. The administration maintained that the ratification deadlines were not enforceable, and that the rescindment of ratification by some states was legally dubious. The opposing side, however, argued that the archivist was right to raise concerns about the ERA's ratification. They pointed to the original ratification deadline and the rescinded votes as evidence that the amendment had not met the constitutional requirements. This legal standoff highlights the complexities of the amendment process and the lack of clarity surrounding the ERA's status. Ultimately, the courts will likely decide whether the ERA is indeed the 28th Amendment to the United States Constitution. Section 5. The ERA and the Supreme Court, a critical juncture for women's rights. The legal battle over the ERA comes at a pivotal moment for women's rights in the United States. The Supreme Court's recent overturning of Roe v. Wade, the landmark ruling that guaranteed the right to abortion, has sent shockwaves through the country. This decision has raised concerns about the future of other hard-won rights for women, including access to contraception and equal pay. The ERA, if recognized as part of the Constitution, could provide a crucial legal bulwark against further erosion of women's rights. It would enshrine the principle of gender equality in the nation's founding document, making it more difficult for future laws and policies to discriminate based on sex. Proponents of the ERA argue that it would provide a strong legal basis for challenging discriminatory laws and practices. They believe it would strengthen existing laws prohibiting sex discrimination in areas like employment, education, and housing, and could lead to new legislation addressing issues like pregnancy discrimination and sexual harassment. However, opponents of the ERA argue that it is unnecessary and potentially harmful. They claim that existing laws already provide sufficient protections against sex discrimination, and that the ERA could have unintended consequences, such as forcing women into the military draft or undermining support for single-sex institutions like women's shelters. The Supreme Court's eventual ruling on the ERA's ratification will have far-reaching implications for women's rights. It will shape the legal landscape for gender equality for generations to come. Section 6. Beyond the ERA, Biden's last stand on social justice. The declaration of the ERA's ratification was just one of several significant actions taken by President Biden in his final days in office. These actions reflect his commitment to social justice and his desire to solidify his legacy as a champion for marginalized communities. In addition to the ERA, Biden granted clemency to a significant number of nonviolent drug offenders. This decision was aimed at addressing racial disparities in the criminal justice system and providing second chances to those who have served their time. He also took steps to protect the environment by banning new oil and gas drilling in certain areas and designating new national monuments. Furthermore, Biden extended temporary protected status for immigrants from several countries facing armed conflict or natural disasters. This decision will allow these individuals to remain in the United States without fear of deportation. Biden's actions in his final days in office were met with praise by his supporters, who saw them as a bold affirmation of his progressive values. They argued that these actions would have a lasting positive impact on the lives of millions of Americans. However, Biden's critics viewed these last-minute moves as an attempt to circumvent the incoming administration and impose his will on the country. They argued that many of these actions exceeded his executive authority and would be reversed by his successor. Section 7. The Trump factor uncertainty looms over Biden's legacy. The return of Donald Trump to the White House has cast a long shadow over Biden's final actions as president. Trump, who has expressed skepticism about the ERA and other progressive policies, has signaled his intention to undo many of Biden's executive orders. Trump's previous administration was marked by a rollback of environmental regulations, restrictions on immigration, and a conservative shift in the judiciary. His return to power has raised concerns among progressives that he will once again prioritize his own agenda over the interests of marginalized communities. The future of the ERA, in particular, remains uncertain under a Trump administration. Trump has not publicly stated his position on the amendment since becoming president again. However, his previous appointments to the Supreme Court and his general alignment with conservative legal views suggest that he may not be inclined to support the ERA's ratification. Trump's stance on the ERA and his willingness to use his executive power to challenge Biden's actions will be closely watched by both sides of the political spectrum. The outcome of this power struggle will have significant consequences for the future of women's rights and the direction of the country. Section 8. A Nation Divided. The ERA as a battleground for equality. The battle over the ERA is not just a legal debate, it is a reflection of the deep divisions that exist within American society. The amendment has become a lightning rod for broader cultural and political debates about gender roles, equality, and the role of government. On one side of the divide are those who believe that the ERA is essential for achieving full gender equality. They argue that the amendment is necessary to address persistent discrimination against women in various areas of life, including the workplace, education, and the justice system. They see the ERA as a long overdue recognition of women's fundamental rights and a necessary step towards creating a more just and equitable society. On the other side are those who oppose the ERA, arguing that it is unnecessary, divisive, and potentially harmful. They contend that existing laws already provide sufficient protections against sex discrimination. They also express concerns that the ERA could have unintended consequences, such as forcing women into the military draft or undermining support for single-sex institutions like women's shelters. The debate over the ERA highlights the challenges of achieving meaningful progress on social justice issues in a deeply polarized society. It underscores the need for respectful dialogue, empathy, and a willingness to find common ground. The future of the ERA remains uncertain, but the fight for gender equality continues. Section 9. The fight continues. The unfinished business of gender equality. Despite the uncertainty surrounding the ERA's fate, one thing is clear: the fight for gender equality is far from over. Regardless of whether the ERA is ultimately enshrined in the Constitution, the pursuit of equal rights for all genders remains a moral imperative and a necessary step towards creating a more just and equitable society. The struggle for gender equality is not confined to courtrooms and legislative chambers. It is a battle waged every day in homes, workplaces, schools, and communities across the country. It is a fight against deeply ingrained biases, stereotypes, and systemic barriers that prevent women and girls from reaching their full potential. The journey towards gender equality requires a multifaceted approach. It demands legal reforms that ensure equal protection under the law, economic policies that promote pay equity and close the gender wage gap, and social and cultural shifts that challenge harmful stereotypes and promote gender equality from a young age. The fight for gender equality is a marathon, not a sprint. It requires unwavering commitment, resilience, and a belief in the inherent worth and dignity of all individuals, regardless of their gender. While the path ahead may be long and arduous,